Hello and welcome to The Society with Barrister Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Climate change, as we all understand, is just not a lounge talk or, for that matter, a drawing room conversation anymore, because climate change, as we all understand, is impacting all of us, that too very seriously. Having said that, in today's show, we'll be talking about the serious impact of climate change more so on us as a society. We'll also be talking about the challenges that we might possibly face more so when it comes to tackling this very issue. In this regard, we'll be talking about the role of the state, we'll be talking about the role of various industries, more so the community and the society at large when it comes to devising solutions related to climate change. And last but not the least, we'll also be talking about the very pivotal role of media when it comes to raising awareness on climate change and related issues. This and much more to follow on today's show, and to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Miss Huma Ejaz, who's a lawyer and she's also a policy expert. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. My second panelist for the show today is Syed Mohammad Abu Bakr Saab, who's the communications specialist of International Water and Management Institute. He's also been a reporter on environmental issues. Assalamu alaikum sir and welcome to the show. And via telephone line, we'll be joined by Miss Momi Salim, who's an environmentalist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. Well, to start the conversation with you, madam, for starters, I would want you to actually tell us that when we talk about climate change, we have seen that, of course, it affects not only us, in fact, the entire world in ways more than one. And more recently, we have seen, its adverse impacts on us, more so in the case of, torrential rains that we see in Karachi, or for that matter, floods which have actually devastated the country. But when we talk about solutions, why is it so important at the very outset that we approach this issue with a more proactive approach as opposed to having a merely reactionary one?
Indeed, as you rightly said, that it is important for Pakistan to kind of not only talk about climate change, but also, really work towards climate action. Climate change is something which is happening globally, but the solutions lie locally. Right. No doubt about it that Pakistan is not a contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions. What we see right now at the global, arena, that's not what is due to Pakistan or the developing countries. That is due to developed countries. But at the same time, after Paris Agreement, it was agreed that every country is going to work towards mitigation as well as adaptation. Right. So it's very important that Pakistan aligns its policies in a way where we are able to kind of, factor in climate change, because Pakistan has been topping the list of most vulnerable countries, top 10 most vulnerable countries for last decade. And we have seen that, the impacts of climate change in the shape of floods, in the shape of droughts, in the shape of heat wave.
Right, Momi. And I think in this regard, we need to adopt a more, proactive approach as opposed to, adopting one which is basically, more reaction based, on which I'll come to you, madam. I think she's generally given us a good overview of the issues that we need to address. But when we talk about, laws, when we talk about policies, what kind of a framework does Pakistan have in place so as to address climate change?
Pakistan has National Climate Change Policy 2012, which was introduced to actually encourage more forestation, to have more programs and projects for ecological enhancement of these, not only forestation but also to avoid flooding, because we have now record breaking rains which was anticipated then, and it's happening in the last 3-4 years, as we see in Karachi, as we see in KP, as we see in Sindh areas. So it is, and also the change of season, because the crop was being affected by the change of season. So now new change of season schedule has to be mentioned, and then also to sustainable growth of this green revolution that the Pakistan wanted to bring in. Right. But there has to be sustainable to look at that, and also to introduce energy policy which is more eco-friendly. And now recently it has also brought in the policy in which electric cars, just like with the world has introduced low emission of carbon dioxide, and that is by introducing electric cars. Right. So this is what the government is trying to do by reducing import duties on such products, by encouraging solar. solar by introducing reducing import duties on it, making it more incentivized.
Right.
So there is a whole policy framework in place under which Pakistan also went and signed the conventions in Paris.
Right.
It signed the Montreal Convention. It has signed various bilateral agreements also in the world. And as we all know that we are the top 10 affected countries in the world.
But when we talk about policies, I feel that, you know, they should be two-pronged. One, looking at the short-term impact, two, looking at the long-term impact. So how far-sighted are our policies in this regard?
To protect climate, if you look at from any climate expert, which they'll tell you, it is a long-term process. There's no short-term to it. In the short-term, only what the government could do is bring in laws by banning the plastic bags. Yes, you can also the single-use plastic. That was also another issue which was brought in. So they can bring some laws, notifications banning that you cannot use plastic bags. What they can do is do this, or they can work on these products which are oxidants, which create, which is POPs, a POP policy, that anything which is toxic to the human environment, for example, lead poisoning, which causes lead poisoning to the environment, they should be stopped. Now, these are the things which can be done immediately.
Right. And they can, I don't even think that they are that
they can
expensive.
Be done immediately. Plantation of trees is being done, so saplings are being done immediately. But whether it's sustainable, we don't know, because these saplings need to also grow into trees.
Right.
So somebody needs to look after them. Some places they grow on their own. So these are only the short-term things that we can do.
Right.
By banning those products which are, for example, in straws. They brought in that single use can be, whether they can be used or not. Paper straws were brought in. So I'm just giving you examples of various very short-term things that you can do. However, I mean, there's a climate change expert can tell you.
Right.
Laws can only ban them, notify whatever the climate expert tells us. But everything is supposed to be long-term. And the laws have also stopped cutting down the trees.
Right, madam, your point is noted. I think she's been basically giving us an overview of the laws and, you know, what kind of strategies do we need to have in place, both in terms of short term and of course addressing this problem long term. But when we talk about, you know, the very basic causes, you being somebody who's had that benefit of working on this very closely, what do you feel are the main causes of climate change? And when it comes to impacting people, why is it that, you know, those who are actually disadvantaged, those who are already marginalized, they actually feel that impact more?
The issue of climate change is now the issue of survival, for not just for Pakistan but for the rest of the world as well, because with increasing emissions, the planet is warming and we are having forest fires not just in Pakistan but in all parts of the world. Nowadays, UK is in the grip of a heat wave and parts of England have been drought stricken. So the issue is that not just the vulnerable communities but the most developed countries, everyone is getting disproportionately affected. What matters now is that those which are developing countries, they have a limited capacity, they have limited funding to deal with such hazards.
Limited technology.
Yes, limited technology as well. As part of the Paris Agreement, it was decided and agreed upon that $100 billion per year would be mobilized under Green Climate Fund.
Right, sir, but I think we should also talk about the very root causes of climate change, because of course we understand the fact that, you know, this is a very pressing problem and this is something which just doesn't affect Pakistan, but we see it affecting, you know, different parts of the world. Different countries, even developed countries, have not been able to escape it.
The primary reason for this is the use of fossil fuels for industrialization. So in the industrial era, coal and oil was readily used to develop. And there was a concern back then as well in 60s and 70s that increased use of these fossil fuels can increase emissions and it can warm the planet. But what they used to, the coal lobby, they actually then started funding you know, climate skeptics and PR firms to confuse the public that nothing of that sort will happen. So similar thing was done by the cigarette companies to confuse the public that cigarettes are not harmful.
Right.
And this way they confuse the public, they delayed climate action.
So basically this is something which at the end of the day is just not based on the way we live, of course, because that also has a direct relation with the way that, you know, carbon dioxide emissions are released in the environment, but also with industrial waste. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Momi. I think we must also talk about the government's focus on this very issue, because we have seen that the Federal Minister of Climate Change, Senator Sherry Rahman Saiba, she has been very vocal about the same, and we have seen her very categorically quoting that, you know, when it comes to climate change must be something which should be the core of all negotiations. And we've also seen, you know, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab also saying that, you know, this is something which is on the agenda of the government. Rather, it is being given priority to, and in this regard we also saw that, you know, climate change task force was actually made too. So when we talk about all these initiatives being taken on part of the government, how far do you feel have we come, and what more is it do you feel that we need to do?
Well, I think we have been working on ecosystem restoration as part of our policy. But I think a lot needs to be done on the adaptation side as well. No doubt there has been a political will, not only of the current government, but also of the previous governments in really taking this issue forward. We do not have enough resources to kind of implement everything that we have kind of put down in the policy. And there comes the global role, because of course there is loss and damage due to these disasters that we face. Then there is also a shift that we have to bring in our energy consumption and energy use. We have to shift to fossil fuels. All of this, and also infrastructure which is compatible to climate change. So all of this needs a lot of resources, a lot of money, and we unfortunately do not have. On the other hand, we are losing money with all these, floods and other disasters. Now, where has government has been doing a lot on ecosystem restoration, but one thing that needs to be done proactively is also to have a national adaptation plan, which of course comes from the global level. A country like Nepal has it, but we do not have it. And it's very much important because, as I said initially, that we are not the contributors. We are the ones who are facing it. So unless we have a very comprehensive adaptation policy, we won't be able to kind of move forward with the pace that we want. And as you said, we have, it's always a symptomatic treatment. So when we have a national adaptation policies, we might have a proactive, role where we can really for example, we are agrarian society, we are agriculture-based economy, so we should have climate-compatible agriculture technologies introduced. We should have, for example, Pakistan, it is, according to estimates, Pakistan would be water scarce country by 2025 or 2030. So it's very important that we put in place infrastructures that work towards conservation of water, for example.
Right, Momi, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Huma. I think we must also talk about the role of the courts, more so the Pakistani judiciary, especially when it comes to, making sure that people do get, climate justice, and in that course also, kind of upholding their fundamental human rights. So at a very basic level, where do you see the link between people enjoying, a healthy environment, a non-polluted environment, and of course, them getting their fundamental rights?
Courts have played Shala Zia case is there, that it is integral to the right to enjoy, the right to life in its judgment, the right to life in its judgment, that enjoying a healthy environment is part of it, the right to life.
Right.
So this is a very important judgment. And after that, obviously, the courts stopped the cutting down of the marri trees. The courts brought in non-plastic bags, which had to be used. Plastic was omitted from all these shopping bags all over the country, by the way.
Right.
And the law has become a law, and it has been implemented. And then now we are working, the courts have also worked on reducing emissions and bringing in electric cars or alternatives. So courts are doing that project. As we said, the justice system is working as much as possible with the government policy to reduce reduce the effects of climate change. However, it's a very humongous task.
Right.
It is not just it's not the job of the courts to do it.
Of course.
It is a job of the government to do it. It is the job of the international community to also ensure that when any government who takes these policies, to give incentives for that. And obviously, about the carbon credits that that has been implemented in the business community. Any industry which uses all environment friendly technique and reducing paper use, and these things are
so
all
many little things.
Yeah,
but
so
I
many
think,
little
madam,
things
the
are
courts
coming.
have played a very momentum role when it comes to, I think, in a way facilitating that dialogue, giving us that momentum to actually head in the right direction. So many issues which were otherwise not picked up, they have been picked up by the Pakistani judiciary, for which I think it deserves due credit.
It does deserve it, and also the parliament needs to bring in more legal framework for this. Obviously, the court judgments initiated, for example, the plastic use, so they were adequate legal framework, but we need more legal framework.
Right.
We need laws now, because we are living in 2021 and climate change now is a reality.
Of course.
Not only us, the whole world is working on it.
Right.
So we have plenty to take from. So I feel that the regulation needs to be more stricter now. There should be more enforcement has to be more stricter.
Right.
I think regulations will always be there, but since we are signatories, so we are bound. The rule is that once you're signatory to a framework, then you have to introduce it as legal framework or as laws in your own country and then implement it.
Right.
So we've always been able to introduce as the laws, but the implementation is where that we lack.
Right, madam, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Abu Bakr Saab. I think we must also talk about the very pivotal role of media, more so when it comes to, you know, raising awareness on such issues and doing it in the right manner, considering that you yourself have been reporting on such issues. How, you know, aware, how cognizant do you feel is the Pakistani media when it comes to, you know, taking up environmental issues, more specifically the issue of climate change?
I feel that the Pakistani media is not very sensitized on environmental issues, due to which the reporting and coverage of environmental issues, climate change, wildlife issues is very low. One of the main reasons being that the preference of advertisers lies somewhere else. They are not interested to support environmental causes, number one. The second is that the media prefers to cover political issues more than environment, because, you know, they can add the crisp and the tarka to political issues, but for climate change they seem to be slow and dull. But we can of course make it interesting through highlighting the plight of communities who are vulnerable to climatic impacts, let it be sea level rise or communities who are vulnerable to
But how precisely
droughts.
do you feel can we do that? Because you have been reporting all over Pakistan, you've been traveling all over Pakistan to actually report on such issues. So what kind of documentaries, what kind of, you know, reports, what kind of perhaps talk shows can we have on such issues so that they interest, you know, the common man too?
We can have you know, stories and programs on all sorts of issues. For instance, you know, if it's the issue of climate induced migration, so we very well know that climate induced migration is happening not just in the coastal areas but also in the north. When the weather patterns are not very favorable, when there is a drought situation, there is nothing to eat, then people tend to migrate to places where they can find opportunities. So, you know, these topics can become
basically you mean to say the social impact and the cultural context of basically climate induced migration is something that we need to work upon as well. And I think that's a very relevant point raised by yourself, because these are often the issues which are ignored. Coming to you, Ms. Momi, I think we must also talk about the role of community, society at large in this regard. You know, when we talk about people being aware, when we talk about people being sensitized, how aware do you feel is the common Pakistani man today when it comes to, you know, talking about climate change, talking about environmental issues? Because at the end of the day, I think this is something that we've been talking about repeatedly, that this is something that practically affects everybody.
I think first and foremost, I've seen there's always been a confusion between climate change and environment. Environmental issues, of course, both go hand in hand, but they both are different. The major difference is that climate change does not happen with a single person's, you know, actions, whereas your local environment can degrade, and climate change is then going to exacerbate that. Community's role is very much important. Of course, our communities are not that aware, be it farmers, be it, you know, local people, how their actions are kind of contributing. So I think how community can really contribute is by changing their consumption patterns. And when I say this, what I mean is to reduce, you know, all those consumption patterns which use a lot of resource. This includes food. You know, if we use a lot of meat, that also causes a lot of emission. Fashion industry uses a lot of water, wastes a lot of water, etc., etc.
I think then the fashion industry mark that you made is quite relevant here, because over a period of time we've also seen in Pakistan that, there has been a shift to sustainable fashion industry, so to speak, as well. Madam, I think this is something which would interest you, and I'll put this question to you as well, that when we talk about cutting down, the costs of our clothes, when we talk about, basically using fashion, being fashionable, but doing it at a cost which is not very heavy on the environment, how do you feel can we do that?
I think what you can do is you need to again introduce legislation. You see, without legislation, okay, voluntarily if you expect people to do it, it didn't happen. Even with the plastic, if you saw that. So I feel that you need to introduce relevant legislation to regulate the fashion industry with respect to the climate change impact, as they have pointed out. And only with that and implementation of it can you reduce that impact. Otherwise, I personally don't think voluntarily people are going to stop wearing less, or people are going to start using more vegetable dyes or more this. They are not going to use this. You have to regulate the fashion industry by bringing in legislation for them, which regulates that. Consumer will not automatically stop, even in any developed country. I have not seen that. Okay, yes, people are switching over or vegetable dyes or everything, but that's a very minority.
Although we did see, I remember in the past few years, they have been fashion brands which have been promoting basically products, more particularly shoes, which have been made from recyclable materials. But then again, I think that is an issue.
That is like a drop in an ocean.
Yeah. I think industries, fashion industry is just one industry that way. But when we talk about industries generally, how precisely can we motivate industries to actually work, but do it in a way which doesn't cost the environment? Because at the end of the day, what Madam said is very relevant. We have to have the right policy, we have to have the right infrastructure, because of course you have to manage two competing interests together. One, that businesses and their growth isn't hampered. Two, on the other side is that, the way the businesses are conducted, they don't contribute to, air pollution, or for that matter, to various environmental issues.
I feel that the prevailing situation or the prevailing discourse is around decarbonization. So there are targets by various, countries, by industries, that they are going to decarbonize by 2050, some say by 2040. And it's important for us in Pakistan to start the same discussion that, maybe any leading industry that is a textile company, they say they're going to decarbonize completely by 2040. So we need to come up with that discussion which is happening throughout the world. This is the way we can reduce our carbon footprint, and for this purpose the government needs to incentivize. Decarbonization might be a costly endeavor for which the government needs to give subsidies so that the industry has the necessary resources to make the shift. Otherwise, it will be very difficult.
Right, sir. You wanted to add something to that, Madam?
Yes. For example, the coal use, the coal use by the industry. Now, if you see the coal emissions, it's very expensive to have that infrastructure which is environment friendly. So coal is discouraged, and if coal has to be used, it has to be used in an expensive manner, and a country like Pakistan cannot afford it. So coal use. Then the cement industry, it was also heavily, I remember there were cases taken to the court for the best way cement case and this and that, and about usage of water in a certain area, and damaging that area and causing pollution into the drinking water in that area. And then we have the coal use, the water, and the sugar industry, the amount of water it uses, because water is becoming a scarcity now, and water has to be used for agricultural purposes rather than for production of sugar or for cement or for something like that. So these are the things that we need to, the only way is for a country like Pakistan, two ways, is to bring in the regulation and to have funding from the world, from the developed country, in order to help Pakistan install those expensive equipment, because it's expensive.
On which I'll come to you, Ms. Momi. I think we must also talk about this with regards to the responsibility that is vested on the developing countries in this regard. So when it comes to, seeking help, be it in terms of financial assistance, be it in terms of, help with regards to, of course, employing better technology, what help, can Pakistan or other developing countries actually expect from the developed world in order to combat climate change?
Well, this has been a point of contention in the global debates that we have had for last so many years at COP. where, of course, they take the historic responsibility, but not to a level where they, there was a pool of 100 billion which had to be filled, but unfortunately on COP26 it was only 70 billion or something. So which means that there is lack of will in the developed world, and this is exactly the climate injustice that we talk about. But here I would say that private sector is something very, very important that we need to kind of focus upon when it comes to climate change, not only involving them in mitigating climate change, but really incentivizing them, but at the same time, using their CSR to kind of help communities adapt to climate change. So partnership, even in SDGs we talk about, the 17th SDG is partnership. So it's very important that for climate change we have these partnerships. And these partnerships, of course, I'm talking about not only private sector within Pakistan, but of course multilateral organizations are also kind of now focusing towards private sector, because they want to bring in multinational companies, and they are becoming responsible. They like to, be it greenwashing or be it for the real purpose, that they really want to contribute. So it's only about us giving them that direction, telling them where to invest. Like, our neighboring country has actually now taken the CSR money, and they have made it a kind of an account under the government. Right. And then each CSO can kind of, extract money from there to do something for the community. So we have to come up with organized way of innovative finance.
And in this regard, you feel the public-private partnerships, they are the way forward, basically, because of course I think it would be very unfair to put all the burden on the state, and it would be very unfair to put all the burden on the private sector too. So I think the win-win for everybody would be that, of course, all the stakeholders go hand in hand, and there's proper coordination in this regard, even when we talk about it at a very basic, a governmental level.
Indeed. And I think that private sector is somehow also part of the problem. Because I think, first of all, they need to, Huma was talking about, of course, carbon, the kind of fuel that they are using, the kind of infrastructure that they are building. So, first of all, they have to change themselves, but at the same time, of course, states cannot, especially developing ones, cannot take this burden. And they need to be helped either globally, private sector and other actors as well, because not all of it is money. Some of it is also technical capacity that needs to be built. And I think private sector does have that kind of capacity that could be, transferred to other sectors in a country.
Right, madam, your point is noted. Coming to you, and to conclude today's show, overall discussing so many issues, we spoke about, the government's role. We also spoke about the steps that the government is taking in this regard, and then of course the role of the judiciary, community awareness, so many other things. But if you were to basically, wrap up today's conversation, what at the end of the day you feel is the way forward if we are to address this issue of climate change, that too fast and of course in a humane manner, because I feel that these are very pressing concerns which we have to keep in mind when we are talking about the issue of climate change?
I think we will need to first of all address the issue of the industry, because that's where most of the pollutants and all these healthy hazardous products are a byproduct. So in order to incentivize industry, there has to be programs. There's a Clean Pakistan Green Index program. There is this carbon emissions was introduced. Globally you can trade carbon credits, and in Pakistan carbon credit trade could start. So I feel that you could start with the industry, and if you regulate the industry, you bring in not only regulations, you bring in incentives for them to switch over, for example, to solar, to cleaner energy production, to cleaner hazardous waste disposable management systems and all that. So, and you accordingly have that kind of system, only then I think that could be a very big start.
Right.
If you target the industry first.
Right.
And then you bring in, obviously, I just said laws are important.
Laws are very important.
Parliament will have to now, come into adaptation of these laws from various countries. And third is, obviously, we need financial support in order to be able to meet the targets that the entire world is setting up for countries like Pakistan.
Right.
We are an underdeveloped country still. We are a developing country, and we have our own issues of resources.
Right.
We do not have the resources that the first world has.
Right.
So we will need that financial assistance also targeted towards that. And also the third is that you reward any person, entity, company or individual, whether it's a industry or not an industry, you have to have a reward system.
But at the end of the day, regardless of the fact that what the government does, what laws we have in place, I think the will has to come from within. Sir, I'll come to you. I think we understand the fact that Pakistan at one end is facing this issue of scarcity of water, but at the other end we also see that it is actually witnessing unprecedented floods. So as somebody who has a very keen eye on environmental issues, more so on climate change and of course water conservation as well by that yardstick, how do you feel can we work towards reducing Pakistan's vulnerabilities, especially when it comes to climate change?
I think our infrastructure needs to be made resilient to climatic impact, so that if in case there is a flooding event, the infrastructure is able to withstand the impact of a flood. For example, there was a flood in Hunza Valley and it destroyed a bridge completely, it washed away the bridge. So if the bridge would have was more resilient to such climatic shocks, it would have withstand that pressure. I feel that it's an issue of water governance in Pakistan, that water as a commodity is not being managed in an appropriate manner. So we at the International Water Management Institute, we have a program on climate resilient solutions for improving water governance, where we are working with the federal and provincial governments to build their capacities and accounting for the groundwater, so that not everyone can pump as much water as they feel like. We need to have exact information on how much water is available, groundwater is available, and its quality, information about the surface water, information about sharing, so that informed decisions can be taken place and water can be diverted to those sectors where it is needed the most.
Right.
For example, in Lahore, now Punjab Irrigation Department has approved the request of Wasa Lahore to allocate 100 cusics of water, surface water, canal water, for drinking purposes for the people of Lahore.
Right.
So this 100 cusics water was actually meant for some tail enders for agriculture purposes.
I think very important thing that I gather from what you're saying is that whatever solutions we tend to have, be it in terms of having water reservation projects or for that matter any other initiatives, they need to be very context specific, because of course the issues that we might face in one part of Pakistan might not be the issues that you face in another part of Pakistan, on which I'll come to you, Ms. Momi. And to conclude today's show, well, I think Sir has raised some very valid points on which I would want you to deliberate further, because we are talking about how climate change impacts the society and what solutions do we need to have in place, more specifically when it comes to having solutions which are best suited, keeping in mind the particular geography of a particular place. So in this regard, what do you feel needs to be done? Because then again we can't have a one-stop solution for everything.
Indeed, we cannot have just one solution for everything, and when we talk about solutions, there's diversity in social setting, economic situation, and also ecology everywhere in the globe. But I think the solutions are very much based on how aware is the community, what are the resources available, and what is the level of problem that they are facing at this point in time. So for example, flood-prone areas need to have different solutions. But climate change, one thing about climate change is it is unprecedented and it is unpredictable. ADB had suggested 2-3 years ago, one of the reports said that we will have less floods in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And now you see in 2022, we are having more floods here. So it is so unprecedented and unpredictable that you just cannot see what the solution would be. There are overarching solutions in energy. Of course, we have to shift our energy from fossil-based to of course, renewable. Likewise, we need to, as I said earlier as well, we need to reduce our consumption, and this is not only at the individual level, but also at the country level. We need to do this, and then we all need to contribute to ecosystem restoration.
Right.
Because all those green spaces, open spaces are very important, and all this ecology is very important. When we go with housing societies and kind of lack of this urban development, we are also damaging our local environment, which is being exacerbated by climate change.
Right, Momi, your point is noted. Thank you so much, Ms. Huma. Thank you so much, Abu Bakar Saab, and thank you so much, Momi, for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the very pressing and the burning issue of climate change and how precisely does it affect us, in ways more than one. There's no denying to the fact that when we talk about climate change, it is just not a general environmental issue. It is also, of course, a social justice and a human rights related issue. So when we talk about solutions, it is very important at the end of the day that these solutions should ideally be those solutions which not only stem from the government, but they also should be very community centric. They should also emanate from individuals, the lifestyles that they choose to have, and also, of course, in that regard, in terms of the practices that various businesses, various industries have, because at the end of the day, climate change is something that affects everybody, and considering that we are all in it together, we should ideally propose to have a solution to it together. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.